more intense.
Okay, yeah, this is like
Those
Gabby
all
in
the
the
questions
room
were
and came and
asked,
asked
or
for
is it?
that.
No, actually, I wasn't thinking.
done.
No, you know what it came to my mind. Okay, so this is yours, and this is.
One's mine.
And I don't know who's that.
Talk to it.
Sing it.
Testing.
Is everything okay?
Yep, and are we getting
Is it
audio
this
there?
one? Yeah.
You want to start?
Okay, if it's these two, then let them know because I think Eric might confuse them.
Oh yeah.
So just
So
make him.
Oh, you're not the moderator anymore.
Yeah.
so this is now. This time, this is your podium. That doesn't change. But right now, your presenters are here. No
Why are
longer
you
there.
telling me they're the ones?
Wait.
yeah, they're not.
Robinson.
Oh right.
Eric,
Oh sorry.
just to
Can I-
going over it.
Okay, let me. You need to. You kind of.
I was going all the way on campus. So I went to school at McMaster, so I grew up in UFT, but I still try hard to find stuff on campus here.
Why? Fortunately, there was a printed out sign like this. This has to be here for a reason. What school did you go to?
Sorry?
What school did you go to?
UFT.
U of T. Okay, so this is coming at home for you.
Yeah, not this building though. It's not the engineering ones, but yes, nostalgia for sure.
That's, some things don't change.
No. Yeah. Are you also UFT alum?
I'm actually black fly.
And welcome to the industry panel. I am still Eric. I have not changed. And I am still a surgery biomedical engineering student at Waterloo. Hello, I'm Robinson. I'm from, where am I from? I'm from CUBE. Yes, I am indeed from CUBE, and I'll be serving as our other moderator for the panel. All right, to get ourselves started, I was wondering if we could have all of the panelists introduce themselves and maybe talk a little bit about their professional background, please.
We'll start left to right, maybe.
Sure.
What you just wanna do?
So this is a great microphone, by the way. Appreciate that. Some good engineering ingenuity. Nice to meet everybody. So certainly thank you very much for coming out today. My name is John Dillon. And I'll be the first to actually say that I'm not an engineer. So I don't want to make any claims or positions about that. My educational background is in medical physics. And I worked as a medical physicist in a hospital in Toronto. And that was actually how I found my sort of pathway and way into medical devices and fundamentally to building a medical device company here in Toronto, Molly Surgical. And yeah, there's certainly a lot of history there along that circuitous pathway. And I think that most of you are aligned to a much more streamlined pathway into industry or academia. So certainly excited to spend the afternoon here, or at least an hour, with all of you, and we can talk about different pathways and support your progress as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Kyle Jackson. I'll also say I'm not an engineer. I am finishing my PhD right now in chemical and biological engineering, but I do not say that I'm an engineer. I did not do my undergrad in engineering. I did my undergrad in synthetic biology and drug discovery work, mostly in kind of antibiotic research. Now my research is more so on bioengineering, which is designing viruses essentially to kill bacteria. A bit about my professional background. I've co-founded 3 life science companies in the past, 2 biotech, 1 medical device, all of which failed spectacularly, but that is also the life cycle of startups. And then over the past 5 years, I've been more working in the venture capital and investment banking scene. I've worked at various venture capital firms in Toronto, focusing on life sciences, and right now I'm working at Amplitude Ventures and their venture creation studio, Preempt, trying to build new biotech companies.
That's very cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Kashish Verma. I am an engineer. I did my undergrad actually at U of T, engineering science, for those of you who are in the program. I represent. I have been with Medtronic for 5 years. I worked in several functions in post-market or commercial space, but mostly in the new product development space. And I would say my experience is more extensive in manufacturing and operations. So recently I'm leading their operations for one of their cardiac ablation products across US, Canada, and Asia. So prior to that, as part of my undergrad, I did do like a little bit of research internships here and there, and I worked for a startup as an intern for over a year. And Medtronic was actually my first company that I started my career with, so I'm excited to be here and talk to you all today.
All right, thank you all for introducing yourselves. So I'm going to start off with the first question. How do your particular backgrounds in particular disciplines affect or influence the way you approach a project in the workplace? And were there moments that you guys think your perspectives shaped the direction of the collaboration?
I can kick it off too. So I can probably give a bit more of a recent example. So as I said, I'm finishing my PhD right now, and the PhD that I do is inherently multidisciplinary. I work with clinicians, basic scientists, as well as engineers to further the research goals. And so essentially, when I started my PhD, we were working with a small cohort of patients in Hamilton who have inflammatory bowel disease. And up until that point, these clinicians have never worked with engineers before and have never worked with basic scientists before. And so their perspective on the challenges that these patients were facing was very uni-lens. It was only through a singular kind of mindset. And so when I came into the scene, given that I am doing my PhD in engineering, I come from a bit more of a multidisciplinary background, I didn't want to think just exclusively about the patient, but more about the kind of the underlying biological system that is the environment in their gut, since I deal with patients who have inflammatory bowel disease. And so when you break down that environment to first principles, just like how you might do in many of your engineering courses, you're able to unlock new therapeutic potentials to try to treat those patients based off of underlying conditions. And so in that respect, when trying to break it down to first principles, we're actually able to take much more personalized therapeutic approaches to address the actual root causes of disease pathology these patients are experiencing. So that is, in a sense, how my background in engineering multidisciplinary lens can influence how we actually treat patients right now.
Go ahead.
Sounds good. I'll give a slightly different example. So I'm leading a team of engineers, and one of the bigger projects that I'm doing right now is scaling the product and getting it out to as many patients and hospitals as possible. So leading an engineering team, I understand the risks and the challenges of scaling and sort of the bottlenecks in manufacturing. So, given how well the product is performing, the business obviously wants to sell more and more. But, what I'm able to give as feedback is sort of, setting up real expectations so they don't oversell or overcommit. And they've had a more gradual pace of rolling out the product, which has actually helped in the adaptability of the product by the patients. Because nothing's worse than, promising a product and not having to deliver it. So I think with the engineering background, understanding sort of the risks and challenges, it's about setting expectations with sort of our marketing teams or our leadership execs on what is a realistic, outcome that we can commit to. And sort of, having that influence the rollout strategy of the product, I think has been influential.
And I think I'll probably land somewhere in the middle of those. And that I find, in my role, in my background, I operate mostly as sort of a connector, an integrator of, ideas and information across all these different groups. And, a big part of that is being in the clinic, having these clinician, supporters, whether they're nurses, doctors, surgeons, whoever that is. And, if we talk about specifically the molesurgical space that we operate in, a very, very busy clinic will see maybe 200 patients a year. And that is, they're seeing them in clinic, they're seeing them in surgery, post-op, follow-up, all that, and they're dealing with that patient and their family all the way through their journey. Whereas for us on the industry side, in our category, a successful device is, being used in 100,000, maybe 200,000 procedures a year in our tiny little category. And so being able to translate that information from one physician, what they're seeing and what they're feeling, to, okay, but is this just something that's local? Is this only happening because those patients in that area are, it's a different demographic? Like, how does that, get translated? And so that's where, in my role, in my background, is very much acting as an integrator of that information across all these different environments, across all these different countries and regions to say, okay, this is how we should shift the product, or we should think about these things when we look down the road in how we want that product map to look like 3-4 years from now, because the actual therapeutic landscape is changing, those sorts of things. So that's going to be a huge part of your role in years to come, is taking all this information and actually combining it and integrating it to lay out that pathway for, manufacturing or investment decisions, and saying, hey, this is where we really need to be focused, 3 years from now. Because ultimately, we should all know what we're doing today. To be able to lay out that, pathway for everyone, that's the real challenge that you're going to be tasked with as future biomedical engineers in this space.
Thank you guys very much for the insight. And actually, just following up straight up on that topic, especially John, I hope I can get a bit more of your insights on it. So, for example, you were talking about the what is called connecting the investors to the actual R&D team. I just wanted to know, is there any specific example that you thought of where there was actual disagreement between the two sides on a single problem? And if so, what does that conversation look like, and what dictates the final result?
Well, I'll take a bit of a step back. And interestingly, we had great connections at Sunnybrook Hospital. That's where our first sort of device was integrated and built, and we did our first trials. And we listened very, very, very closely to their clinical pathway and how they were handling their patients. And we built a whole device and a whole company and framework around that clinical pathway. And part of, the missteps that you'll make many, many points in your career, or, in a company, or even this year, is you take that as, one point of truth and absolute truth. And originally, going back to 2017, 2018, we didn't even go across the street. We didn't go, down to UHN, or we didn't go to St. Mike's. We didn't ask anybody else, and we'd made all these decisions. And that's a very, challenging space to come back from it. And, we were fortunate in that we did eventually make those connections and, ask other people. But the sooner that you can find out, that, hey, this is not going to work for a million reasons, the better you'll do. And if you can take that and pivot from that information, fabulous. If that sinks your idea, well, better that happened, today than 5 years from now after you've gotten all sorts of investment and you've made all these promises to all these people. So, just, get out there with that idea, and don't be afraid to have people critique it, because that's ultimately going to improve your device. You want people to tell you why they don't like it or why it's not working for them.
I can probably add to this more so from a VC and venture creation, like really early stage type lens, where your goal as a startup founder or as an early stage investor is not necessarily to try to convince yourself that this is the next greatest thing. It's more so the opposite. Your goal is to try to kill ideas as quickly as possible, because at the end of the day, your most valuable commodity is your time. As John said, the quicker you realize that either a solution, whether it be a product or some sort of platform technology that you're developing, is not actually addressing the core challenges that face the healthcare system or face the technology or energy system, the better, because then you can pivot to the real ideas that are actually going to bring tangible outcomes. And so in my work as a VC, we look for those ideas that we want to kill quickly to get to those groundbreaking ideas that can scale quickly and that can generate billions of dollars. So as engineers, that's kind of a lens that you might want to start thinking about taking. It's a bit counterintuitive from what you're taught in school, but practically speaking, that's kind of how the real world works, especially if you are looking to go into startups.
I think you nailed it, yeah. Nothing more to add. That's good.
Yeah, that was a really good question. Those were absolutely great responses. Speaking of collaborating with people, and within the industry context, how do you bring together different stakeholders, like you guys said, clinicians, and even like tech companies and healthcare providers, and how do you communicate and collaborate with them on an engineering project and ensure it's effective?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I lead teams that are, all over the world, and I think a big piece of collaboration is understanding how the work of each of the teams sort of connect with each other and sort of understanding the bigger picture. So if you have, for example, a timeline, you need to deliver things and sort of trace back, what's needed for the step before and where are the interdependencies. So I think it really helps as a project engineer to, understand those links between different functions and different teams and what they need from each other, and then presenting it in a way that's easy to consume for the viewer. So, if you're like a software engineer on my team, for example, like you're just focused on this one solution, but how does that interact with sort of the mechanical engineer or the clinical team on the field that are using the interface? Sort of giving that visibility to the owner and making them understand, why they need to deliver at a certain time. I think that helps. That helps the collaboration piece and also helps the different teams understand, why certain timelines are the way they are. So I think just understanding the interdependencies and sort of communicating that effectively is something that, I use on the daily.
Yeah, I don't have, too much to add to that other than it is a huge challenge, especially when you get beyond the walls of your company or your group or your team, because ultimately everyone has their own, motivations or deadlines or challenges. So Molly was certainly involved in a few partnerships over the years, and now that we've been acquired by Stryker, we're certainly pushed into those, a fair bit more often. And it's interesting because ultimately we all want the same end goal. We want to, improve patients' lives or, their treatment or how their family can connect to them while they're on treatment, those sorts of things. But fundamentally, everyone's looking at it from a different problem, a different situation. And so it's really important to get back to, well, when you come across, that challenge, why is that a challenge, for that other party? Because, understanding why they're having trouble with it is important so that you can actually get to the other side of it, together still as partners, as opposed to the first sort of stumbling block that you have, saying, okay, well, this isn't going to work between, company A and company B, or party A, party B, and saying, okay, well, this isn't working for me for these reasons. Like, this is what we need to fundamentally, address. And it comes back to ultimately just, basic human communication. And oftentimes there's open communication within that company, and then the message that comes across from company A to company B is like, oh, we're just not that interested in this anymore. It's like, well, no, you were last month, you were 2 months ago, so let's talk about the actual reason or issue behind it. So that's more than anything, is just focusing on where that trouble is coming from, because ultimately you're going to have some sort of challenge in that co-development work or whatever that is.
Thank you very much for the answers. And well, I guess following up on that, as well as connecting with the academic panel, borrowing Dr. Yadolahi's situation, is even if you do have a product for a situation, especially like if it's just at the very early stage in a lab research context, it's still very difficult to actually move it onto market and become a clinically relevant product. So I wish to ask, what are some of the challenges the biggest hurdles and challenges faced during this process, and how do you guys go around?
Yeah. So this can be an entire panel discussion in its own right, to be honest. I'll look at it from a very a specific aspect, and then I'll let my other panelists join in. When it comes to trying to translate research technology from a university setting specifically out into the commercial, clinical market, what have you, one of the biggest barriers is intellectual property and understanding intellectual property. I know as engineers in the room, you may or may not have heard of intellectual property, you may or may not have heard of patents, trademarks, trade secrets, copyrights, etc. If you don't know what that stuff is, go and learn the basics. It's vitally important, because if you do not own the technology that you are trying to develop, there's absolutely no realistic scenario where you'll be able to actually commercialize that technology, sell it to a Stryker or a Medtronic or a Johnson & Johnson, for example. And so, yes, on top of all technical skills that you are learning in your courses, focusing on the legality issues around the technology as well. So do you own it? Can you actually operate with this technology too? So engage with your colleagues who are studying law, for example. Engage with lawyers. They're not scary. Yes, they're expensive, but oftentimes they love talking to engineers, because you guys have the brightest ideas, but unless you actually protect your ideas, there's no way it's going to get commercialized.
It's interesting, because going back to the biggest kind of problems with that is, in industry, it sometimes is looked as a bit of a social issue in medical devices, is that medical devices companies are companies. They need to make money so that they can, return money to shareholders, bring value, and make more devices and help more people. Most people focus on the first part of that when they're trying to build an argument, but fundamentally they're here to help people and make healthcare better. That's fundamentally the goal of all medical device companies. And you'll find that all through the ranks. And the most painful conversations I would have is with a physician entrepreneur who says, hey, I've got this awesome idea. I had this case back in the summer. If I had just had this thing, I could have saved the guy's life in the ER. It's like, that's an awesome idea. How many times has that happened? And it's like, oh yeah, that was the only time in my 35-year career that specific instance this device would have worked. And I'm like, as painful as this is, you can't really build a company around that one sort of miracle device that would have saved that one patient. It's the meat and potatoes of everyday things of, the company that, acquired Molly Surgical, they build hospital beds. That's 90%, not 90%, but that's where most people know their products. And that keeps the lights on so that they can do all these other interesting things and get out there and, continue to innovate and really push those boundaries. And so that's the painful part and the challenge of having those conversations, on those partnerships, is certainly that physician entrepreneur, I hope he has the IP behind him, but then to build a business case around it and say, yeah, you actually have a viable business, you need to have probably 10,000 patients a year to say, yeah, there's something there. And that's another painful part of that process.
perspective. So I'm not directly involved in these, but something cool that I think Medtronic does is, I mean, they have a lot of connections with cardiologists and physicians, so they really use that to their advantage and really get early feedback on sort of potential technologies and use the feedback we get back from the physicians and cardiologists to sort of generate, interest and hype in from sort of funding perspective. So like the product, for example, that I'm currently working on is like 15 years in the making of preclinical and clinical research, and is really backed up by a lot of physicians over those years who've been, using word of mouth to like spread how cool the potential of the technology is. And all of that work led to sort of the launch, and that really sort of showed, right? So getting feedback from the user base and using that to sort of position the technology as valuable, I think that's something that Medtronic does, which makes sense, and I really like that. Yeah.
I think the last thing I'll add, because I know we said we can have a whole panel on this actually, is probably one of the things that's I've probably evaluated hundreds of deals in my tenure in the various VC firms that I've worked at. The biggest deal killer is a solo founder, in that they think they can do it all by themselves and that they don't work together as a team. You need to know where your limits are from a knowledge standpoint, and you need to surround yourself by individuals, especially if you're trying to develop a company or technology that complements your skill sets. Because the reality is, there's not enough time in the day for you to do everything. You need to delegate, you need to work together, you need to basically divvy up all the issues. I'm sure, John, you know this very well, in order to meet the goals of the technology as well as the business. So yes, you might think you can do it alone. Don't. It will kill you, and your technology will never go off the ground. So find that team that complements your skill sets, that you trust, and that you can work together very strongly with.
Thank you very much for the answers. I think it's time to take a path to law and commerce now. But let's.
I know it's boring, but it's really helpful as an engineer.
All right. Thank you. I'll hand it back to Bob. All right. Yeah. Thank you guys for those responses. Going off gears a little bit, AI has been a very hot topic, even on social medias. And so, on the theme of bridging the gap, how do you guys see AI connecting with the biomedical engineering industry? And how do you guys think that might change the medical industry might look like in maybe like 10 years?
No, it's okay.
So I actually know this quite well. One of the two biotech companies that I co-founded was a AI drug discovery platform. I developed this back in 2017 with a few of my close friends, and we actually sold the technology to a pharmaceutical company. So I know it quite well, and this was before the AI boom entered into the drug discovery and life sciences market in 2018, 2019. Since then, my opinion on it has soured. I'll be completely honest with you. And this is because, when it comes to traditional drug discovery work, it takes about 5 to 6-ish years in traditional lenses to get a lead asset to preclinical and early stage clinical testing. AI in the drug discovery world was meant to accelerate that process. And it's been in the scene for 6, 7-ish years now. Not a single drug discovered by AI algorithms has actually successfully completed clinical trials. And so the intrinsic value proposition that AI is bringing to drug discovery hasn't come to full fruition as it said it would. Will it change in the next 5 years? Probably, but I think it's been overhyped. And we need to be cognizant of that. We need to know its both benefits, but also its limitations. So that's kind of where I sit on this. I don't know who wants to take it next.
I'll jump in, yeah. So as a counter to that, or a supporter of some of that argument, AI is massively overhyped, and now that everyone, all the new cell phones have AI, and it'll come back around, but all the new cell phones are pushing how you have the AI personal assistant in your pocket, and that's great for me to be able to say, hey, remember to get these groceries, and then say, hey, maybe you also want bananas if you're buying, I don't know, things to make pancakes. It's great in that lens for the everyday person, but it's no secret that AI has actually been around for a very long time. So 2009, one of my very first research projects, we were using, machine learning at the time to, push the boundaries of what we could do versus what a physician could do in the clinic in surgery. And that was it's still in use now, in the clinic. And it's only recently become more interesting to people because oh, AI is a really cool thing. Like, this is a 15-year-old piece of software. Like, it's not cutting edge anymore. But there's, new AI models and those sorts of things. And so it has become very much a household name. But, we've just released effectively the third version of our platform and our software in our actual medical devices. All of them used AI along the way. And that was before FDA was like, oh, how are we going to regulate this? What are we going to do? But not in the AI sense that people think of, a talking box that, records everything you do and learns about you, but very much in terms of we've given a very, strict set of problems, and it's learned very quickly how to, solve that better than we could with fundamental formulas, from the physics perspective in the background previously. So, it's a tool like anything. When CAD came around, people said that was going to take away, draftsman jobs and engineering jobs. Surprisingly, it didn't. Same thing, when computer programming came around, it's like, oh, this is going to take away, tons of jobs for people in accounting. No, it allows them to actually, do their job better than it did before. And AI is going to be a tool in a very similar way. It's going to accelerate certain things.
I'll just quickly add to that. As working in Medtronic, I can agree with that. There's a lot of regulation around using AI in medical devices. In fact, a lot of conservative FDA regulations, or like EUMDR if you're looking at Europe. There's very strict data rules that make it harder to use and use it in a clinical setting, or have sufficient data to prove that it's not breaching any sort of data privacy, or it's the data is being used in an ethical way. So it's quite it's not as we're not adapting to it as much as maybe other industries. It is used as a tool, but also a lot of restrictions, right? Like, you can't just put information, ChatGPT, that are confidential. So that there's a lot of regulation around it, which I think is going to slow down the adaptability of AI within medtech.
Is that controversial enough for you?
I think that's controversial enough. I would like to see a bit more, but keep it professional. All right, so taking the cart around a bit, so I just wanted to ask, right now, especially from your own experience, going from school to the workplace, there has been some major, what's called differences between the two. So I'm just very curious from your personal experiences, what is the biggest thing that you actually learned in work, not in school? And do you think that thing can be taught in school to help, help the current students?
Yeah, I did my undergrad 5 years ago, and I think going through the program that I did, there were a few things that I took in the workplace, but a lot of them were, learning at the job, really and the biggest one is sort of soft skills, or managing teams and understanding people on your team and how they perform versus what support they need. So I think from a technical standpoint, sure that this school can prepare you in some ways, but getting real world experience, which you guys can through the various clubs in your school. I mean, getting involved is a great way to build that. But a lot of, at least in my experience, a lot of it has been learning at the job. I wouldn't say you will know everything when you graduate and go out in the field.
There's very little I can add on to that except for saying slide decks, presentations, writing reports, those three things. I know you guys are busy with all your technical courses, but take an English course. Learn how to write essays, for example. Increase that ability to communicate effectively. Because at the end of the day, if you cannot communicate your ideas from a technical standpoint, they are worthless. And I'll just say it like that.
I'll be somewhere in the middle on both of those in reality. School does a fantastic job in shoring up your technical skills. You can always go out and learn more, have projects on the side, do all those sorts of things. But the one thing that school will never teach you in a real capacity is effectively, sales, the sales process, salesmanship. And, we're doing this every single day. We just don't realize it. You're, selling your partner on going out to this restaurant or that restaurant. You're selling your parents on why you should borrow the car for the weekend. You're always selling someone, but to turn that into an actual, skill and process takes a whole lot of communication. And, in professional sales, you may think, oh, I don't want to be in professional sales. You're going to be in professional sales. You're going to sell your boss on why you need $100,000 to go do this new AI project. You're going to sell somebody on something at some point in your career. And the better you are at that, it's a tool, it's a skill like anything else. And a big part of that is communication. A big part of that is the soft skills. And a big part of that is process, and so learning that process to it is a real, it's not a secret. It's out there. The books haven't changed in hundreds and hundreds of years, but it's a very important thing. I had to sell my co-founder on why this was a good idea when he had a big mortgage and kids and stuff like that. We, had to sell investors. We had to sell our first customer. We had to sell, the business. Like there's salesmanship all along the way, and that's an important thing. And it takes communication, it takes soft skills. It took a hell of a lot of PowerPoints and slide decks, and that's an important thing. Yeah.
Would you say being able to draw amino acid structure is essential for the job?
No. I mean, know what they are, but you don't need to draw it. Also, find a mentor. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I struggle with this a lot. I'm probably closer to you guys in terms of schooling than my co-panelists here because I'm still wrapping up my PhD. But try to find a mentor and stick to them, and that they will become lifelong partners in your journey. And people who have gone into industry, especially if you went to the same school as you previously, they love passing down their knowledge. All you gotta do is ask.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree on both part of the mentorship and the communication, which I never, after having the opportunity to do co-ops and stuff, I finally got to understand why it's important, even say if you're emailing your employer or supervisor, how important it is. I'm going to switch topics a little bit more onto sustainability, and sustainability is a big thing in many industries. And so how can the biomedical engineering sector then develop solutions that are not only innovative, but also environmentally and economically stable in the long run?
I can start, yeah. I can give examples, based on the things that I've done. You can really be very mindful, right? In your design decisions. I'll give you an example. We make a catheter that needs to be sterilized. So something as simple as what sterilization technology do we use for this? There's several, depending on the application, but some are more toxic, even though they might be cheaper. So I know the industry is slowly moving towards more sustainable options. We're not quite there yet, but being mindful and advocating for those more sustainable technologies is a step in the right direction. The other thing, I work in operations, just finding out, I figure out how to get product to any country in the best way possible. And sometimes the cheapest option isn't the most optimized route globally. If I want to send product from Malaysia to Japan, for some reason it needs to go through the US, which makes no sense. So, advocating for optimized routes, something as simple as that. So you can find ways to, push the organization to more sustainable routes. And those are some of the examples that, I've recently encountered.
I think in general right now, the world is going through a lot of uncertainty and a lot of political turmoil across the globe. And we're thinking very much in short-term gains as opposed to long-term gains. And I think especially as engineers, when it comes to sustainability, we really got to think that long-term picture. With that in mind, think about not how necessary to manufacture something right now, but how is this going to impact your kids in the future, next generation, et cetera? What kind of policies, mindset do you personally want to instill on them? So I read a recent report from HSBC that was trying to think about what the outlook of physicians will be in 2035. And so they surveyed a bunch of medical students and residences this year, because by in 10 years, there'll be fellows and attending physicians. And thinking about who your stakeholder is in 10 years and what they want to see, and then create a sustainable model to get to that road, that's the kind of long-term picture that you want to think about. You're not going to have all of the answers to figure out what the best road manufacturing is right now, or what the best sterilization technique is, or what the best reagents are. But there will be people out there that do know. And so long as you have that roadmap for you to think about, okay, I need to get from milestone X to Y to Z, then you can kind of go out and figure out who aligns with your long-term vision. Because at the end of the day, climate change is real, it is happening, it's going to affect us, there's going to be massive changes to our geopolitics in the next 10 years. We need to be prepared for that. And we need to take a more sustainable model to everything that we do, and having that roadmap, having that long-term vision is key, and just ignoring all of the noise right now.
I certainly agree with that. And the challenge, and again, I'm solely looking at this from a medical devices perspective, but the challenge is that there's so much regulation, and especially when you look at, the rules change, and the rules change faster sometimes than the companies can actually catch up to the rules, which also seems backwards. But taking a step back, I was sitting here thinking, well, sustainability is a really hard thing in medical devices because ultimately there's so much disposables. Everything gets thrown in. And there's a huge shift towards that, especially in the States, and that's where, it drives profits for large companies, more disposables. But there's actually a huge push to greenify, let's say, the packaging pathway. So, it's a challenge because for our devices, that they come in a plastic tray, and that plastic tray gets opened up and tossed in the garbage. But the vendor we work with has developed a new plastic that still keeps the perfect brand new plastic on the surface. They have a middle layer where they reuse all the offcuts from their process that accounts for 25% because they're punching these trays out of a big sheet. And then the bottom layer is again a brand new layer. And so they've come to the market with, okay, this will be 4% more to make this plastic. Are you willing to pay 4% more for your trays for this greener solution? And we're like, absolutely. 4% on 83 cents or however much our tray costs, our customers will never even notice that. Like, we're going to do that. But the impact that they're having is they're not throwing out any waste at the production site, and they're actually collecting this waste back and making it a truly circular economy for these plastic trays. And as much as, that's one part of this big product, it is, but it's part of every single medical device product that's tossed in the garbage before the device actually gets used. So, if you can look at something and you can improve a process by 5% in something that you're doing, and if everybody's doing that, it's going to have a huge impact at the end of the day, because ultimately these things add up, and 10 years down the line it's going to be a whole different landscape from where we are today. And then the flip side of that is if the regulations can catch up to our interests and we can actually use a totally recycled package, we would make some real big steps in the right direction. So again, that's just from one perspective, but certainly it goes back to being able to communicate and get people around those ideas and have those soft skills to say, hey, regulators, this is going to protect the device just the same. It's going to keep it sterile. It's going to do all those things. Why are we throwing this all out? So being able to have those conversations and build those connections, but it is certainly a huge perspective from these larger organizations.
Thank you so much for your answers. Now we would like to open up the discussion to all of the members here. So if you guys are seeking any mentors, well, now's the perfect time to ask your questions. Go ahead.
Do you want to?
Go.
So I have a question for Ashish, the life side. Great to see.
Hi.
So the project management pathway, and I think this is a general question as well. Like going from an undergraduate degree to being like the project director,
Management. Yeah.
manager, and all this we've been trying. I'm just curious, like, what advice would you have for someone starting out on this pathway?
Yeah, this is like my opinion only, right? People can have different thoughts on this, but I did start off as an engineer. I took up PM just a bit 2 years ago, so I started off as an engineer and took project management. I would say there's really no rush. I've been in project management for 2 years now, and I'm almost considering going back down to a technical route because I miss the technology. So really, if you enjoy, managing teams, if you enjoy building them and supporting them, that's certainly something that, you can explore down the path. But I don't think there's a rush to get into it, especially if you're just out of university. I would actually advise to get really good at a skill, at the technology, understanding the technology. I feel like, in my experience, great PMs were the ones who understood the work the best because they understood the challenges the engineers face and are able to sort of guide them through it better. So really no rush. I do enjoy it, but like I said, I'm considering going back to the tech route and being more technical, getting my hands dirty. But I do, it's fun managing sort of teams across globally and across different cultures. So that's certainly a piece that I've really liked.
I'm not sure I have anything to add to this.
That's, yeah.
Yeah.
You over there?
This is a question for Mr. Jackson. As someone who's in both synthetic biology and VC, how do you assess viability potential projects in such a failure-prone field from a scientific and a, I guess, business standpoint?
First of all, I don't think I've ever been called Mr. Jackson before, so thank you. It's a great question, and there's no right answer to it. I'll be completely honest with you. A lot of it has to do with sitting down with the scientists themselves and looking at their data in great detail. I think when it comes to synthetic biology, much like medical devices, regulation is a crapshoot right now. There's very little guidance to it. And so when investing in synthetic biology platforms, you more so need to think about what type of underlying biology could this theoretical concept unlock. So say you're trying to design a genetic circuit to control when to turn an enzyme on and off. So let's say you have an enzyme going through your vasculature system, so it's in the blood, and it is interacting with some sort of biomarker associated with a tumor cell. And when that biomarker gets elevated, that causes the genetic circuit to be turned on, that enzyme becomes active and can cleave those pre-tumor cells. When you think about the scientific technicality aspect of it, there's a lot of underlying issues there that you need to piece out in sequential order. But from an investment standpoint, you more so need to think about, okay, what is the platform technology there and what can that unlock? So let's say, yes, you are able to develop this circuit that allows you to target a tumor cell. What other cells could you target? Could you target T cells or B cells that might be indicated in autoimmune conditions? Could you target bacterial infections that cause sepsis? And could you do that in such a way that you can have that patient survive that acute shock infection? So it's more of that big picture platform idea that you tackle as a VC at this early stage. When you get to more late stage, either an asset that's just about to enter into clinical development or they're already in clinical trials, that's where you do a lot of data analysis over the clinical trial data. But this early stage, it's really about, do you believe in the vision of the scientist, of the founder? Is there sufficient room for this type of platform technology to exist? And then what are those areas of disease indication that it could be used for and unlock new biology? So it's not really a direct way of answering your question, but that was the kind of the core principles that I think about when evaluating those types of platforms.
In the far back. Think so.
Okay. I have a question. So would you advise that students who are in a really interdisciplinary undergrad degree in biomedical engineering or systems design engineering go into a master's to further specialize on their knowledge and yet gain like a more distinctive set of skills rather than just kind of being a jack of all trades? And if so, how would you recommend navigating that so that they aren't like solely kind of pigeonholing themselves into research but also available for working in the industry as well?
Who wants to take a crack at that?
I'll jump on that and I'll summarize, and you just keep me honest. It's basically, I'm coming to the end of my undergrad and I'm wondering, should I, of a biomedical degree, which is a very broad engineering degree, as opposed to systems design or something like that you mentioned, and you're wondering, should you go down further academia into a master's degree to get some extra technicality out of it and narrow that focus? But it was a two-part question. So the second part of that was, does that then leave you, and I don't have a better word right now, but like stuck in academia versus, yeah, okay. So going back to the top of that, I came into academia and industry as a jack of all trades in that I was a medical physicist, which was both very narrow but not actually operating in medical physics. So medical physics is a very broad degree in terms of, radiation, let's say. So imaging, x-rays, treatment, radiation, things like that. Or radiation protection, other scary things, stuff like that. And I did none of those things. Now, the manner in which I did that was by leveraging research, getting involved in a research lab. I ran a research lab for 5-6 years before switching over into actual hospital administration before making the jump over to industry. But the interesting thing is that a lot of people, and I'll take a step back here and hopefully this all ties together, is that a lot of people look at careers as a very singular direction and unilateral ladder. So it's like, I'm going to graduate as a mechanical engineer specializing in thermodynamics, and then I'm going to go work for a brake pad company working on their heat cycling of their brake pads, and then I'm going to become from a junior engineer to a senior engineer to a platform engineer at this brake company or whatever that is, and they see that in 15 years I hope to be VP of engineering for for Bosch brakes. And the thing that I'd advise from the pathway that I just talked to you about is that there's careers aren't necessarily that on that ladder trajectory. Some people are, and that's wonderful if you have that mission that you're trying to get to. As long as there's some sort of theme, and that theme only needs to bring value and matter to you across all these different things that you're going to do after your undergrad degree, no one's going to say that that was wrong. All sorts of people go through different pathways, and my co-founder, if we went back 15 years, like, absolutely not, I don't want to be in industry, I don't want to be a salesman, I don't want to run a company, definitely don't want to be a CEO. And here he is, that's all he's done, and now he's slated to do that again for a much larger, at a much bigger company. So you also don't know what things are, you're going to bump into along the way, and you're going to find really interesting. And more than anything, I would open you up and say, yes, absolutely. If that master's is interesting to you and you think it's going to take you down a pathway that you want to go, definitely. I was off to do a master's in race car engineering. So I found that hugely interesting and passionate about, and then someone else in my family got sick, and I was like, why am I going to spend my time and effort for someone to go around in a circle 0.1 seconds faster than someone else? Like, that's not going to make me feel good at the end of the day or the end of the year. And so that was ultimately how I got back into the hospital and found my way into medical devices. So it's a very long-winded way of saying, if it makes sense to you, absolutely, but don't worry about having to justify that to anybody else, because there's no one else in this world that ultimately say that was the right move or the wrong move, And it's ultimately, if that, career move, decision, educational pathway brings you a sense and purpose and value, definitely. And I'm opposite of both of these over here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. And I just want to add to that, right? I went into industry straight out of undergrad. My undergrad was pretty broad, and it really just, it's really what you make of it, right? Like, so my first role was a reliability engineer. I didn't even know what that was. I'm like, sure, I'll do it. Like, I'm fresh out of undergrad, I need a job. And that role taught me, how things break in the field. So a reliability engineer at Medtronic is someone who looks at commercial products and looks at, what went wrong in a case, and then assesses whether it was a design failure, whether it was something the surgeon did, and how we can improve. So that taught me something that I then took to my next role, manufacturing, which is, again, something I never thought I would do. But working in manufacturing, I was able to influence design. I got these really cool catheter designs, and I was like, we're not going to be able to make them at the rate that the business wants us to make them, so you need to change this, this, and this. So really, it's about what you take out of the role, and then how do you sell it to your next position. Like you summarized, there's no one clear path. It's there's learnings from any path you take.
At the end of the day, master's, PhD, they're just letters beside your name. They're not actually going to mean anything at the end of the day. I'll be completely honest with you. Most people in my industry, most of them have PhDs. They don't verbalize that. No one calls each other Dr. Johnson or Dr. McKinney or anything like that. No one cares. I'll be completely honest with you. No one's going to care about the publications that I published in my PhD. That's the reality of it. People think that you need to have a PhD or you need to have a master's to get these jobs. You actually don't. It might help you get a foot in the door and might help you get that interview. But the most important thing is, do you relate to the people that you're working with? And do you have that curiosity to learn those technical skills that you learn on the job? And yes, a PhD or yes, a master's might get you that interview, but something that might be more powerful to get you that interview is networking, and go into CUBEC events like this, go into cocktail hours, go into bowling, go into paintball, whatever. Go into these events that are part of university or part of extracurricular organizations. That is equally important, if not more important, than having a few extra letters beside your name.
All right, thank you everyone for their questions. Sorry very much due to time constraints, that will be our last question. So right before we wrap up the actual panel talk, I just want to give a closing key point to all the members here. So for all three of you, what would you describe one single thing they should take away from this panel in one word?
In one word. Okay, I'll cheat and just say 2 words. Just stay curious. That's all it is. Stay curious.
I'll go in with belief, and I'll expand on that, but really just, bet on yourself. That's a belief. Have, a light at the end of the tunnel of all this effort. That's belief. It's really, all going somewhere at some point. Just, have belief in yourself.
Similar to you, not curious, but learn, right? There's something to be learned with every role, every project, every club that you've been a part of. So understand what is it that you're learning, what skill you're sharpening, and keep that with yourself. I know that's not one word, I'm sorry, but learn, learn from everything.
Thank you guys, and I believe that brings us to the end of the industry panel. Please feel free if you'd like to ask your own questions after the panel, but besides that, I think we will be moving on. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. It was, yeah.
Mr. Dr. Jackson.
Hopefully, Mr. Jackson.